The prairie stretched wide and endless, like a memory that refused to fade. Gold brushed against the horizon, the last light of day slipping gently into the arms of evening. Wind moved through the tall grass in soft waves, whispering stories no one stayed long enough to hear. A lone wagon creaked along a narrow trail, its wheels carving quiet lines into the dust. It did not hurry. Nothing out here ever did. Inside sat a girl who had learned the same. Eliza May kept her hands folded in her lap, fingers resting one over the other as if holding something fragile in place. Her dress was simple, worn at the edges. Not neglected, just lived in. There was a stillness about her that did not come from peace, but from practice. She had learned how to sit with silence, how to make herself smaller than the spaces she occupied, how to arrive without expecting anyone to notice. And still she came. The driver did not speak much. Every now and then, he glanced back at her like a man unsure if he should apologize for the road ahead. But no apology came, only the rhythm of hooves against dry earth. "You sure about this place, miss?" he muttered once, voice trailing like it did not wish to be heard. Eliza lifted her gaze just slightly, not fully meeting his eyes. "I was told they needed someone." That was enough. It always had to be. The land began to change as they rode deeper into it. Fewer signs of life, fewer fences. Even the sky felt quieter here, as though it too had chosen distance. By the time the ranch came into view, dusk had settled fully, wrapping everything in a soft, uncertain blue. It stood alone, weathered wood, worn thin by years of sun and wind. A porch that leaned just enough to suggest it remembered better days. The barn off to the side carried the same tired posture, like something that had been waiting but no longer expected anything to arrive. The wagon came to a stop. The driver climbed down first, slower now, as if stepping into a place that asked for caution. He set her small case on the ground, brushing dust from his hands, though it made no difference. "This is it." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Folks don't usually stay long." Eliza stepped down carefully, her boots meeting the earth with a softness that matched her presence. She did not look around immediately. She let the place feel her first. Then, slowly, she lifted her eyes. There was no welcome here, no light in the windows, no sound of laughter or movement. Only the wind and something else, something heavy, something unspoken. She nodded once, more to herself than to the man. "Thank you for the ride." He lingered as if expecting her to change her mind. When she didn't, he gave a small, uneasy tip of his hat and climbed back onto the wagon. The sound of hooves faded quickly. Out here, even departures were quiet. Eliza stood alone. For a moment, she pressed her fingers together tighter, grounding herself in something familiar. Then she picked up her case and walked toward the house. The porch creaked beneath her weight, a low, tired sound. She paused at the door, her hand hovering just before knocking. Not out of fear, but out of habit, waiting, just in case someone else might open it first. No one did, so she knocked. The sound echoed softly inside, swallowed by the stillness. She waited. A few seconds, then more, just as she began to wonder if the place had been abandoned altogether. There it was. A sound. Not loud, not clear, but enough. A shift of weight. A floorboard answering to footsteps that did not wish to be heard. Eliza did not step back. The door opened slowly, not all the way, just enough. And in the dim space between inside and out, she saw him. Not clearly, not fully, but enough. A man stood there, half shadow, half presence. His shoulders were broad but slouched, like they carried something unseen. His hair was unkempt, falling carelessly across his face. And his eyes, they did not meet hers. They moved past her, through her, like she was not something to look at, but something to endure. This was him, the one they had spoken of in low voices, the one no one stayed with, the one they called mad, as if it were simpler than understanding. Eliza did not flinch. She had seen eyes like that before. Not wild, not cruel, just tired in a way that reached deeper than sleep could fix. "I was sent to help," she said softly, her voice steady, almost gentle enough to disappear into the air. No answer came. The man stood there a moment longer, unmoving, as if deciding whether she was worth the effort of response. Then, without a word, he stepped back from the door. Not an invitation. Not quite. But not a refusal either. Eliza took it for what it was. She stepped inside. The air carried the faint scent of dust and something long untouched. The room was simple, sparse. A chair near the window. A table with little on it. A life reduced to only what was necessary, or what had not yet been abandoned. Behind her, the door closed. The sound settled into the space like a quiet agreement. She placed her case near the wall, careful, respectful. Her movements were small, deliberate. She did not try to fill the silence. She let be. The man had already turned away, moving deeper into the house. His steps were slow, uneven, not from weakness but from disinterest, as if every step required a reason he no longer believed in. Eliza watched him go, just for a moment. Then she turned her attention to the room. A cloth rested over the back of a chair. She picked it up, running it lightly across the table's surface, lifting a thin layer of dust. It was a small act, unnoticed, but it was something. Outside, the wind moved again through the prairie, brushing against the walls like a soft reminder that the world still turned, even here, even now, and somewhere behind her, in the quiet shadows of the house. The man paused, just briefly, as if something about her presence had interrupted the steady rhythm of his silence. He did not turn back, but for the first time in a long while, he did not disappear completely either. And Eliza, the girl no one had waited for, did not leave. Morning arrived gently, like it was unsure whether it should stay. Light slipped through the thin curtains in pale ribbons, settling across the worn wooden floor. Dust stirred in the quiet, drifting slowly as if time itself had grown tired here. Eliza was already awake. She moved through the small kitchen with soft, careful steps, her hands finding purpose before her thoughts had fully formed. Water warmed over the stove. A simple meal took shape, nothing elaborate, just enough. She did not ask if he would eat. She only prepared it. Outside, the prairie stretched wide beneath a sky, still deciding its color. The air carried a coolness that would not last long. Somewhere in the distance, a lone bird called out, its voice thin but certain. Inside, there was only stillness. Until there wasn't. A faint sound from down the hall. A door shifting. Footsteps that paused more often than they moved. Eliza did not turn right away. She let the moment unfold in its own time. Then, quietly, she set a plate on the table. "If you're hungry," she said, her voice low, not reaching, not asking, just existing. No reply, but she felt him there. Not close. Never close. Just present. She stepped away from the table, giving the space back to him as if it had always belonged to him alone. When she moved toward the window, she caught it in the reflection. Not clearly, not fully, but enough. He stood at the edge of the room, still as something carved from old wood. His gaze lingered on the plate, then flickered away, as though even looking too long required something he did not wish to give. Eliza did not watch him directly. She had learned long ago, some things retreat when seen too clearly. So she busied herself with small things. Folding a cloth, adjusting a chair, letting the quiet remain unbroken. Minutes passed, then a shift, a step forward, another, the faint scrape of chair legs against the floor, and then nothing. But when she finally turned, the plate was no longer untouched. It was not much, but it was something. Days began to gather like this. Slow, uncertain, quiet in ways that felt almost sacred. Eliza settled into the rhythm of the ranch without needing to claim it. She opened windows that had forgotten the feel of air. She swept floors that had long given up expecting footsteps. She mended small things, a loose hinge, a torn cloth, a life that had been left to thin itself out. She spoke sometimes, not to fill the silence, but to soften it. "The weather will turn warmer soon," she murmured once while kneading dough. "There's a storm coming, I think," she added another evening, watching the horizon through the fading light. Her words were not meant to be answered, and they weren't. Not at first. He moved through the house like a shadow that refused to disappear. Never where she expected. never where he needed to be. Sometimes she would find a door open that she had closed. Sometimes a chair shifted just slightly from where she had left it. Proof of him without presence. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, that began to change. He stayed a little longer in rooms she occupied. He no longer turned away the moment she entered. His silence, though still vast, no longer felt like a wall, more like a distance waiting to be crossed. In town, they still spoke of him the same way. Eliza heard it when she went to gather supplies, her small basket resting against her arm like something borrowed. "The man's no good," one voice muttered near the store's entrance. "Lost his mind years ago. Best leave him to it." Another voice, softer but no kinder. "Girls like you don't stay long out there." Eliza did not argue. She only nodded once, her gaze steady, her expression unreadable. They did not know him, and in truth neither did she. Not yet. There was one afternoon when the wind carried something heavier than dust. A storm was building far off, the sky pulling itself into darker shades, the horizon folding into something restless. Eliza stood on the porch, watching. She had always liked storms, not for their force, but for the way they made everything honest. No pretending, no hiding, just sky and earth meeting in truth. Behind her, the door creaked softly. She did not turn this time. "You should come inside," she said, her voice barely above the wind. Silence, then closer than before. "I've seen storms." His voice was rough, unused, like something pulled from a place long buried. Eliza's breath stilled just for a moment, not from fear, from recognition. She nodded, though he could not see it. "I believe you." Nothing more was said, but he did not leave. He stood there, just behind her, both of them facing the same horizon, the same gathering storm. And for the first time, the silence between them did not feel empty. It felt shared. That night, the storm passed without reaching them. Only distant thunder, only the promise of rain that never quite arrived. Eliza lit a small lamp, its glow soft and steady against the dark. She sat at the table, her hands resting still, her thoughts quieter than they had been in years. She did not notice him at first, but he was there, sitting across from her, not close enough to touch, but close enough to matter. His eyes did not drift away this time. They rested on her, not searching, not judging, just seeing. Eliza held that gaze for a moment longer than she meant to. Then gently, she lowered her eyes, not out of fear, but because something about being seen, after so long, felt almost too much to hold all at once. Later, when a lamp burned low and the house returned to its quiet breathing, Eliza stepped outside once more. The air had cooled. The earth smelled faintly of distant rain. She wrapped her shawl closer around her shoulders, her gaze lifting to the sky where stars had begun to gather. She did not hear him approach, only felt it, that quiet shift in the air that had begun to feel familiar. He stood beside her, not speaking, not leaving, just there. Eliza let out a slow breath, her voice soft, almost carried away before it fully formed. "It's not so lonely out here, once you listen long enough." The wind moved gently through the grass. For a moment, she thought he might turn away, disappear back into the house, into himself. But he didn't. Instead, after a long pause, his voice came again. Lower this time, quieter. It used to be louder. Eliza turned her head slightly, her eyes finding his in the dim light. Not questioning, not pressing, just listening. He did not explain, and she did not ask, because somehow she understood. That night, when they both returned inside, something had shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way the world would notice, but in the quiet, fragile spaces between two souls. A distance had shortened, a silence had softened, and for the first time in a long while, neither of them felt entirely alone within it. The days no longer passed like something waiting to end. They unfolded slowly, gently, like pages that had finally remembered how to turn. Morning light came easier now. It did not hesitate at the windows. It rested longer on the floors, on the table, on the quiet spaces where life had begun to return. Eliza noticed it first in the smallest ways. A chair pulled closer to the table before she arrived. Water drawn from the well before she reached for the bucket. A door left open, not forgotten, but waiting. He was still a man of few words, but he was no longer a man absent from the world. They worked side by side some days. Not always together, not quite, but near enough that the distance between them felt chosen, not forced. Eliza would tend to the garden patch behind the house, her hands in the soil, her sleeves rolled just enough to let the sun touch her skin. He would fix the fence along the far edge of the land, his movements steady, deliberate, like each nail and post carried more weight than it should. Sometimes their eyes would meet across the stretch of land. Not long, never long, but long enough, and that began to be enough. It was on a quiet afternoon, when the air felt too still for summer and the sky held a softness that spoke of change, that he finally let something break free from the silence. Eliza was sitting on the porch steps, a piece of cloth resting in her lap as she stitched along a careful seam. The thread moved through fabric the way her days now moved through time, patient, unhurried. She did not hear him approach, only felt that familiar shift in the air. He did not sit beside her. Not yet. He leaned against the wooden post, his gaze fixed somewhere far beyond the land, beyond anything the eye could hold. For a long time, neither spoke. Then, without warning, without preparation, "I had a brother." The words fell low, uneven like stones dropped into still water. Eliza's hand stilled. She did not look up right away. She knew better than to rush a moment that had taken so long to arrive. He swallowed, his jaw tightening as if the memory itself resisted being carried. He was younger, he continued, voice quieter now, always laughing at things that weren't funny. A faint breath escaped him, not quite a laugh, not quite anything at all. "I was supposed to look after him." The wind moved gently across the porch, brushing against them like something listening. Eliza set the cloth aside, her fingers resting lightly in her lap. Still, she said nothing, because this was not a story that needed questions. It only needed space. There was an accident. The words came slower now, heavier. A horse spooked, a fall wrong angle. His voice faltered. "I was there." Silence followed, not empty, but full in a way that pressed gently against the chest. "I should have stopped it," he said, almost to himself. "Should have seen it coming." Eliza lifted her gaze then. She did not look at him with pity. She did not soften her expression to ease him. She simply saw him, and in that seeing there was no judgment, only understanding. "You stayed," she said quietly. He frowned slightly, his eyes shifting toward her for the first time. "What? You stayed?" she repeated, her voice steady, warm in a way that did not ask to be believed. "When it mattered, you were there." He shook his head faintly, the motion tired, worn thin. "Wasn't enough." Eliza held his gaze now. "Sometimes," she said softly, "being there is all anyone has to give." The words did not try to fix him. They did not erase what had happened, but they settled somewhere deep where blame had lived too long without being questioned. He did not respond, but something in his shoulders shifted, just slightly, as if a weight had moved, not lifted, but no longer pressing the same way. After that day, the silence changed. It no longer felt like something hiding. It felt like something resting. He began to speak more. Not often, not easily, but when he did, the words came real, unpolished, unguarded. And Eliza listened the way she always had, without trying to shape what was being said into something easier. They shared meals now, not across the room, but at the same table. Sometimes with words, sometimes without, but always with presence. And presence, Eliza had learned, was its own kind of kindness. One evening, as the sky folded itself into soft shades of amber and rose, they sat together on the porch. The world stretched out before them, wide and quiet, but no longer empty. Eliza held a cup of tea between her hands, the warmth seeping gently into her palms. He sat beside her this time, not distant, not hesitant, just there. "You don't ask much," he said after a while, his voice thoughtful, almost uncertain. Eliza smiled faintly, her eyes still on the horizon. "I used to," she answered. Didn't get much in return. He glanced at her then, something in his gaze softer than before. "And now?" She took a slow breath, the air carrying the scent of earth and something blooming unseen. Now, I notice what's given. The words settled between them, quiet and true. He nodded slightly, as if understanding something he had never quite been able to name. There were moments now, small, fleeting, but real, when he would look at her not as someone passing through, but as someone who had stayed. And Eliza, who had spent so long being overlooked, began to feel something unfamiliar rise gently within her. Not excitement, not the sharp edge of hope, but something steadier, something that did not ask to be proven, a kind of belonging that did not demand permission. One morning, she laughed. Softly, unexpectedly. It slipped out before she could stop it, carried on the back of something small, a spilled bit of flour, a clumsy moment that would have once made her shrink into apology. Instead, she laughed, and when she looked up, he was watching her, not confused, not distant, but with something warm, something quiet, something that had not lived in his eyes for a very long time. The moment lingered. Neither spoke, because some things once felt do not need words. But the world beyond the ranch had not forgotten them, and it would not stay quiet forever. One afternoon, a rider came from town, his presence sharp against the stillness that had grown here. Eliza saw him first, her hand rising to shield her eyes from the sun. "He carries news," she murmured. The cowboy stepped beside her, his posture tightening, not in fear, but in recognition. The kind that comes when peace has lasted just long enough to feel fragile. The rider approached, his expression unreadable. "There are men asking about this place," he said, saying it's not fit to be left as it is. His gaze flicked briefly toward the cowboy, saying some things need to be handled. The words hung in the air like something waiting to break. Eliza felt it then, that quiet shift, the same one she had felt the first day she arrived. But this time it was different, because now there was something here worth losing. That evening, the sky dimmed earlier than usual. A hush settled over the land, heavier than before. Eliza stood by the fence, her fingers resting lightly against the wood. He approached slowly, his steps quieter than they had been in days. "You should leave," he said, his voice low, controlled, but carrying something beneath it. She did not turn right away. "Why?" He exhaled, the sound rough at the edges. "Because this place, it doesn't stay kind." Eliza turned then, her eyes meeting his fully. "It already wasn't," she said gently, "when I came." He had no answer for that, only silence, but not the kind that pushed her away, the kind that revealed something deeper. And in that quiet, fragile space between fear and truth, they both understood something neither had spoken yet. She had not come to save him, and he had not healed her, but somewhere along the way, without asking, without naming it, they had become the place the other could finally rest. And for the first time, that felt like something worth fighting for. The night did not fall gently. It came with weight, with a heaviness that pressed against the sky, as though something long held back had finally decided to arrive. Clouds gathered thick and low, swallowing the last traces of light. The prairie, once open and endless, now felt contained, like it was waiting. Eliza stood at the edge of the porch, her fingers wrapped loosely in the fabric of her shawl. The wind had changed. It no longer whispered. It warned. Behind her, the house held a quiet tension. Every creak, every shifting board carrying the sense that something was about to be asked of them. He had not said much since the rider left. He had gone still again, not distant in the same way as before, but guarded. Like a man standing at the edge of something he feared he might fall back into. Eliza did not follow him inside. She stayed where the sky could still be seen, because some answers she had learned only came when you faced what was coming. By morning, they arrived. 3 men, their horses cutting through the land with purpose that did not belong here. Dust rose behind them, sharp and restless like the intent they carried. Eliza saw them first. She felt it in her chest before her eyes confirmed it, that tightening, that quiet knowing. He stepped out beside her soon after, his presence steady but heavier now. The man at the front spoke without greeting. "This place ain't meant to be lived in anymore." His gaze flicked toward the cowboy, carrying the weight of old judgments. "Town's decided it's time things change." No anger, no shouting, just a cold certainty that expected to be obeyed. Eliza's fingers tightened slightly around her shawl. And him? She asked softly, her voice calm in a way that made the moment pause. The man barely glanced at her. He'll be taken somewhere proper. Somewhere proper. The words hung hollow in the air. A place for men no one wished to understand. Eliza felt it then. That old, familiar feeling, being dismissed, being decided for. But this time, it did not settle quietly inside her. This time, it rose. She stepped forward just slightly, enough to be seen. He's not leaving. The words were not loud, but they did not waver. The men shifted, surprised more by her steadiness than her defiance. "This ain't your concern, miss," one of them muttered. Eliza's gaze did not move. "It is because I stayed. Because he stayed. Because this place," she glanced briefly toward the house, toward the land that had slowly come back to life, "is not broken." Silence followed. Not peaceful, but charged. Beside her, he had gone very still. She could feel it, that pull inside him, that old instinct to step back, to disappear before something could be taken again. "You should go," he murmured under his breath, not looking at her. Eliza turned her head slightly. No, it was not a refusal filled with force. It was something quieter, stronger. "I'm not leaving you to stand alone again." The words reached him in a way nothing else had. He closed his eyes briefly, his jaw tightening, not in anger, but in something breaking open. All this time, he had believed isolation was the only way to protect others from himself. And yet here, she was not retreating, not afraid, staying. The sky cracked open then. Thunder rolled across the land, deep and unyielding. Rain began to fall, slow at first, then heavier, soaking into the dust, into the dry places that had waited too long. The men shifted uneasily, their certainty faltering just slightly under the weight of something they could not control. He stepped forward, not behind her, not away from her, beside her. "You don't get to decide for me," he said, his voice low, steady, no longer broken. The words were simple, but they carried years within them. The man at the front frowned, studying him as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "You ain't fit to be out here alone." A pause. Then, quieter, almost uncertain. "You never were." Rain ran down his face, but he did not wipe it away. "Maybe I wasn't," he said. Then his gaze shifted just slightly toward Eliza. "But I'm not alone." The words settled into the storm, into the space between them, into something final. No fight came, no force, just a long silence, broken only by rain against earth. And slowly, one by one, the men turned. Not convinced, not entirely, but something had shifted, something they did not have the right to take. Their horses carried them away the same way they had come, cutting through the land, but leaving something behind this time. Respect, perhaps, or simply acceptance. The storm lingered long after they were gone. Rain fell steady, soaking into the soil, softening the land that had been hardened by too many empty seasons. Eliza stood still for a moment, letting it fall around her. Then, slowly she exhaled, not from relief, but from release. Beside her, he remained where he was, his shoulders no longer carrying the same weight. Not gone, but lighter. "You stayed," he said quietly. Eliza smiled faintly, rain catching in her lashes. "So did you." Days passed. The storm moved on, leaving behind something softer, something renewed. The ranch no longer felt like a place waiting to be abandoned. It felt lived in, alive in quiet ways. The windows stayed open now. The doors no longer closed themselves to the world. Laughter, rare, gentle, but real, found its way into the air. They did not speak of what almost happened. They did not need to. Some things once faced become part of you in ways words cannot carry. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in soft amber and gold, they sat together on the porch. Not separate, not hesitant, just together. The land stretched before them, wide and endless as it had always been, but it no longer felt like something to endure. It felt like something to belong to. Eliza rested her hands in her lap, her gaze steady on the horizon. For a long time, neither spoke. Then softly, "It's quieter now," she said. He nodded slightly. "Not empty," he added. She turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. "No, not empty." A small silence followed. But this one was warm. And maybe that was the truth no one ever said out loud. That some souls are not broken. They're simply left unheard for too long. That sometimes healing does not come from being fixed, but from being seen, from being stayed with, when leaving would have been easier. Eliza had not come to save a mad cowboy, and he had not been waiting to be saved, but somewhere between silence and storm. Two people who had been overlooked by the world found something steady enough to hold. And if you're listening to this, wherever you are, maybe you've known that kind of silence. Maybe you've stood in places where no one thought to stay. But there is a quiet truth in this world. Sometimes, the right person doesn't change your life all at once. They simply sit beside you and refuse to leave. If this story found a place in your heart, take a moment to let it breathe with you. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? And if you believe in quiet love, the kind that stays when it's hardest, leave a like, share your thoughts, and stay a little longer for more stories like this. Because out here in stories like these, no one is ever truly alone. The wind moved once more across the prairie, but this time, it carried something warmer with it.